When I was 15, I had my first girlfriend. We lived in an upper-class neighborhood with quiet, peaceful streets. My girlfriend, Casey, lived just 2 blocks away from me, so I would often walk to her house, almost every evening. One Thursday night during a school break, I decided to head over to her place since I had nothing else to do. It was late, but I didn't have a curfew, so I didn't think much of it and set out on foot. The streets were deserted, as they usually were at that hour. But after walking for a bit, I began to pick up faint noises from behind me. At first, it sounded like something rustling in the bushes. I turned my head slightly to glance back but didn't stop walking. My response was simply to pick up my pace. When I arrived at the next block, another sound caught my attention, a twig snapping. This time, I stopped and quickly turned around, scanning the area. All I could see were the dark, empty streets and the thick rows of bushes that divided the sidewalks from people's yards. The sound felt unnerving, but there was no sign of movement or anyone lurking in the shadows. I brushed off my unease and started walking faster. As I neared Casey's house, another noise rang out, this time distinct, light footsteps trailing behind me. Whipping around again mid-stride, I saw nothing but the stillness of the street under dim lamplight. My heart was beginning to race as I spotted Casey's house in the distance. Taking out my phone, I called her. She answered right away as I explained nervously that I kept hearing strange noises and felt like someone might be following me. Finally, I reached her driveway and stepped onto her property with a growing sense of relief. As I made my way up to her door, I noticed Casey in her bedroom window upstairs. She was on the phone with me and waved when she spotted me. I waved back, but then she froze. Suddenly, she asked in a shaken voice who the man behind me was. I spun around instantly, and to my horror, a fully grown man crouched just 10 feet behind me, moving as if he was trying not to be seen. Panic seized me. I screamed at the top of my lungs and sprinted toward Casey's door, pounding on it desperately. The man lunged forward and grabbed me, trying to pull me into some kind of headlock. But for some reason, maybe because of my yelling or resistance, he let go and bolted down the street. Casey's mom opened the door moments later, her face stricken with worry as she let me inside and locked the door behind me. Casey ran downstairs to check on me as her mother hugged me tightly and asked what had happened. While trembling and struggling to catch my breath, I explained everything. Her mom wasted no time calling the police to report the incident and insisted I stay the night for my safety. The next morning she drove me home. The very next evening brought another terrifying experience. A dangerous thunderstorm raged outside, with heavy rain lashing against our windows and booming thunder rattling the walls. My family had all settled in for the night. My parents were watching TV in the living room while my sister stayed upstairs playing video games. I was in my room relaxing with the sound of the storm until an ear-splitting bang jolted me from my comfort. It came from my bedroom window. Startled, I jumped up and peered outside. Through the rain-streaked glass, I could just make out the figure of a man standing there. The downpour blurred his features, but he began pounding violently on the window while shouting something, his voice muffled by the storm. Cracking open the window just enough to hear him shout through the rain, I caught him saying he was hurt and needed help. He begged for me to let him in. Although his tone sounded desperate, something didn't sit right with me. Instead of opening the window further, I yelled back over the thunder that he should go around to the front door. Then I slammed the window shut and ran to tell my dad about what had happened. Before I could finish explaining everything in the living room, loud pounding erupted at our front door, accompanied by frantic shouting for help. Startled by the unexpected noise, my dad walked toward the door to check, but something made me stop him in his tracks. "Wait," I said uneasily. I wasn't sure it was safe. Before he could question why, our landline phone rang sharply, displaying our next-door neighbor's name on the caller ID. My dad answered it, only to exclaim in disbelief moments later, "No way!" Alarmed by his reaction, we pressed for answers once he hung up. Turning pale, he told us to stay far away from the door. My dad one day, a man emerged from his shed with a large chopping axe. He seemed completely deranged, wandering the streets aimlessly. A few days later, news of his strange behavior made the local newspaper. When I was a young kid, maybe 6 or 7, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. The TV was loud, but somehow I thought I heard my mom calling my name from the basement. I shouted back, "What?" But there was no response. I figured maybe she hadn't heard me. A moment later, I heard her call my name again. This time I got up and walked to the basement door. The lights downstairs were off. As I cautiously made my way halfway down the stairs, I called out to her again. No answer. The silence was unnerving, but what was even stranger was that I couldn't imagine why she'd be down there without the lights on. Deciding it was nothing, I turned to go back upstairs. But just as I reached the top step, I heard her voice again, calling my name, from the darkness below. I froze at the top of the staircase, looking back into the black void below. My heart was pounding. Despite my fear, I flipped on the light switch and walked halfway back down, leaning forward to peer into the basement. I didn't see anyone down there. Then a wave of terror hit me like a freight train. That voice, it sounded exactly like my mom's, but something about it felt wrong. I bolted upstairs, tears streaming down my face, yelling for her as I ran. She came rushing down from upstairs, concerned after hearing me scream. Panicking, I explained what had happened, that something downstairs had been calling my name in her voice. My mom swore she hadn't called me at all and decided to check the basement herself to calm me down. As she went down there, calling out that everything was fine, I stayed frozen at the top of the stairs, trembling. Even though she said there was nothing unusual in the basement, I couldn't shake what I heard. I knew then, and still know now, that something was calling for me that night. And it wasn't my mom. On a different note, my grandpa recently shared a terrifying story of his own. It happened during one of his usual evening walks with his dog, a little Boston Terrier named Sherry that he had named after a dear friend who passed away years ago. My grandpa lives a couple of hours away from us on a remote farm with his wife of 15 years, Mary Ann. Every morning Mary Ann would take Sherry for a walk. Every evening it was my grandpa's turn. One day, around sunset, my grandpa and Sherry were walking along the dirt path by the woods near their property when they crossed paths with a stranger dressed in a large hooded jacket. Sherry immediately started barking and pulling on the leash, typical dog behavior when encountering someone unfamiliar. My grandpa politely greeted the stranger, but the man didn't respond. He just kept walking past them, silent and unbothered. Sherry stayed restless after they passed him. She kept looking back and barking intermittently as they continued their walk. My grandpa kept trying to hush her and tugged on her leash to keep going forward. But after a while, Sherry's barking became more frantic. Curious and slightly uneasy, my grandpa finally turned around to see what had her so worked up, and that's when he saw him again, the hooded man lurking behind a tree at a distance, watching them. A sense of dread gripped him as he realized they were being followed. My grandfather quickened his pace, well, as much as an elderly man could manage, and made sure Sherry stayed close at his side. When he walked outdoors in the evening, he always carried a can of pepper spray in his coat pocket just in case something like this happened. He was nearing his house when he suddenly heard the faint sound of leaves crunching just inches behind him. Before he could even turn around, he felt something, a gloved hand, clamped tightly over his nose and mouth, cutting off his air and muffling any cries for help. Sensing the danger, Sherry barked furiously and even bit at the man's legs or hands. My grandpa wasn't sure where exactly, but her bold actions bought him just enough time to fight back. With every ounce of effort he had, my grandpa wrestled free enough to dig into his pocket and grab the pepper spray canister. He unleashed it with desperation, spraying wildly behind him at least 10 times until his attacker let go with a scream of pain. Not wasting another second, my grandpa did his best to run, or at least move as fast as possible, towards safety. I couldn't quite tell if they were looking at us or not, but there was definitely the distinct outline of a face visible between the curtains. It was eerie, especially since the place had been abandoned for years. Stevie D and I stared longer than we probably should have, trying to make sense of it, when something even stranger caught our attention. The person's face didn't move. Not at all. Curiosity got the better of us. We edged closer, creeping onto the empty driveway. As we neared, it became clear that the figure wasn't a person at all. It seemed to be a Halloween decoration, or perhaps a fake head of some sort. This realization only led to more disturbing questions. Who would have gone into this derelict house to place that thing there? Being the mischievous kids we were back then, Stevie and I decided to find out for ourselves. We stashed our bikes next to an overgrown bush on the side of the house and made our way to the backyard. To our surprise, the back door wasn't locked. Then again, considering someone had clearly already been in there, we figured it wasn't too shocking. We hesitated briefly but then slipped inside. Not wanting to alert anyone or anything, we left the lights off. It was dim and shadowy inside but not completely dark, making it just possible to navigate through the house without much stumbling. Our first destination was the living room. We were itching to get a closer look at that fake head in the window. But as soon as we stepped inside, we were greeted by an overpowering stench, thick and foul. Still, we pressed onward, drawn by a mix of morbid curiosity and teenage bravado. I reached out to pick up the head from its perch on the windowsill, but as soon as I touched it, I recoiled in horror. My hands released it reflexively as I let out an involuntary scream. It wasn't fake. The weight felt all wrong, and worse, the texture was disturbingly close to real skin. As it hit the ground, a dark liquid began seeping out from where I'd picked it up, blood, sticky and real. Stevie and I froze in unison, our wide eyes meeting in sheer terror. We didn't linger. Grabbing each other by the arm, we bolted for the back door. But just as we reached it, we heard a creaking sound from above us, soft cracks from the ceiling, like slow, deliberate footfalls coming from upstairs. Someone was up there. Without a second thought, we fled to our bikes and pedaled away like our lives depended on it. Soon enough, news spread. The head belonged to someone who'd been found days before, a gang-related killing attributed to the Crips. Word also got around that whoever left the head as a warning, or a trophy, might still be squatting in that decaying house. Whether that person was upstairs while Stevie and I stood frozen in terror, I'll never know, and truth be told, I don't want to. That wasn't the last strange experience I've had either. There was another time last year, kind of mundane in comparison but no less unsettling in its own way. At around 9 p.m. someone came knocking on our door. Now, keep in mind, we live in a rural area where uninvited late-night visitors are practically unheard of. Cautiously, I went to get my mom so she could handle it while I hung back and kept watch. The man at the door introduced himself as a business owner, claiming he was starting some sort of company and asking if we supported American-made products. He handed her what appeared to be a sample, a Clorox container, before turning back towards his minivan, supposedly to retrieve a vacuum cleaner to show off. That's when my mom noticed something alarming. There were 5 other men sitting inside the van. She immediately stiffened, turned to me with an edge in her voice and told me to grab her phone, but we didn't have a landline and I couldn't find her cell anywhere. Panicking slightly, I grabbed a kitchen knife instead and stationed myself out of sight but close by. My mom didn't waste a moment. She threw the container back at them and told them to get off her property immediately, warning that she was calling the cops. The men didn't stick around, they peeled out of our driveway almost as quickly as they had pulled in. We never saw that van again. Then there's my third story, not exactly about strange intruders but something that still gives me chills when I think back on it. I've always been into extreme sports, mountain climbing, parasailing, scuba diving, you name it. But skiing has always been my true passion. Backcountry skiing became my latest thrill, a kind of adventure where you go off-piste into unmarked, unpath. While I was walking back up the hill with my skis after not hearing from Q, I crossed paths with another skier. He seemed friendly despite wearing a ski mask. He struck up a conversation about the best ski hills and asked if we were camping in the area. His skis were strapped to an orange backpack, and after a moment, I pointed out the hill I had just skied down and mentioned where our camp was set up. He revealed that he and his wife were looking for a spot to camp near others and asked if I could escort him to our campsite. Reluctantly, I agreed, though I hated trekking all the way back, and grabbed my walkie-talkie to let my friend know I'd be gone for a bit, sending a quick message over the speaker. As we made our way to the campsite, the walkie started emitting static sounds. Someone was trying to reach me, likely Q, but I couldn't make out anything useful given the poor connection. So I pressed on. The hike was longer than anticipated, filled with small talk, until we finally arrived at the camp. I turned towards the man intending to smile, though my ski mask rendered it pointless. He thanked me and said he appreciated my help, but something seemed off. Trying to break the awkwardness, I casually asked where his wife was. He didn't answer. Instead, he began approaching me more closely, and although I initially shrugged off the behavior, my gut began warning me that something wasn't right. Then it hit me, the skis and orange backpack, those belongings weren't his. They matched precisely what Q had worn when we started skiing. At first, I thought it might somehow be a strange prank by Q himself, but that notion quickly faded as I realized the man's voice didn't match his. Now only a few feet away, the man's pace quickened as if preparing to pounce. A tidal wave of panic surged through me as I bolted into my tent, frantically digging through my bag for my flare gun. Before I could fully retreat into safety, I felt his firm grip on my leg, then an excruciating jolt of pain as if my leg were both shocked and burning at once. Screaming out in agony, I managed to grab the flare gun and push the tent zipper open for a clear shot at him. As soon as I aimed, he abruptly backed up, throwing his hands into the air. Finally able to get a good look at him in the light filtering through the tent opening, my worst fears were confirmed. There was a knife embedded deep into my leg. Fighting through the searing pain, I demanded to know where my friend was. The man hesitated briefly but then mumbled that Q was near the bottom of the hill where he'd found me. I ordered him to stay put while I called 911 for immediate help, but he sprinted off before I could even try to stop him. What followed felt like an eternity, a frozen vigil at the campsite with blood staining the snow around my wounded leg as I waited for rescue. Finally, the distant thrum of helicopter blades cut through the silence above me. Holding hope tightly, I fired the flare gun into the sky, a last-ditch signal that ended in relief when the rescue crew landed nearby. They stabilized me and together we set off to locate Q. We spotted him lying motionless in the middle of the hill where I'd last seen him skiing. He was unconscious but alive, stabbed twice in his leg and evidently robbed. Later, he admitted that he had tried desperately to call me on the walkie-talkie while fading into unconsciousness, though the interference made communication impossible. Thankfully, we both made full recoveries after our hospital stay, but that experience still haunts me. Months later, back in my small college town where everything seemed normal again, things took another unsettling turn ominously similar to that snowy night. Late one evening when I should have been sleeping, I stepped out onto the front porch of my apartment for a cigarette break after hours of cramming for exams. Textbook in hand, I reclined on the steps outside while smoking under the quiet sky. Around 2:30 in the morning, a girl who lived in an adjacent apartment returned home alone from downtown. Her unsteady gait suggested she had been drinking heavily. She barely managed to close her door when a man seemingly appeared out of nowhere and knocked right after she entered. She opened it, a decision that immediately seemed odd given the hour, and they began talking. From across the way, I could hear him introduce himself in a too chipper tone for such a shady scenario. The situation struck an uncanny chord with me. Determined not to ignore it, I remained seated outside pretending to study while keeping careful watch on what unfolded. Their conversation dragged on for over 10 minutes. You could tell she was uncomfortable but unsure how to cut it short. The man I once had an experience that left me shaken to my core, one I won't ever forget. I encountered a man who disappeared as mysteriously as he had appeared. Concerned, we called the police. Days later, I sat with a sketch artist to help create a composite image based on what I'd seen. As soon as the sketch was released to the public, calls flooded in. It turned out the man I had seen was a serial predator, someone who preyed on lone women leaving bars, pretending to be a cab driver offering them a lift home. One victim had a stroke of luck. She lived so close to the bars that he didn't have the chance to carry out his ruse. That experience has stuck with me ever since. Another harrowing encounter in my life took place the one and only time I used Craigslist. It's safe to say I'll never be using it again. There was an ad for a ping pong table that I thought would be perfect for my roommate and me. I reached out to the seller and arranged to pick it up later that evening. Before heading out, I removed the back seats from my truck to make space for the table. Upon arriving at the seller's house, I parked out front and sent him a quick text to let him know I'd arrived. Through his open doorway I saw movement, so I hopped out of my truck and made my way to his front entrance. When he came out, I extended my hand for a handshake, but he either didn't see it or ignored it entirely. Feeling awkward, I eventually dropped my hand. His voice was deep and gravelly, likely the product of years of smoking, as he invited me to follow him down into his basement. The house had an unusual scent, cottony and smoky, not unpleasant, just odd. Once in the basement, I saw the ping pong table sitting directly in the center of the room. Before anything else could happen, he suddenly said he needed to grab the paddles and hurried upstairs, leaving me alone. He told me to wait and I figured he was having trouble finding them. After several minutes went by without any sign of him returning, I began glancing around out of boredom, curious about my surroundings. The basement struck me as strange. It was adorned with framed photos of the man but no one else. No family, no friends, just him. One photo featured a dog alongside him, but nothing particularly personal like snapshots of special moments or loved ones. 10 minutes passed. My restlessness got the better of me, so I began looking more closely around the room. Tucked into a corner was a laundry/storage area. One drawer on a utility desk was slightly ajar. For reasons I still can't explain, I pulled it open completely just to see what was inside. What I saw made my stomach turn. It was filled with old Polaroid pictures that were deeply disturbing, all depicting a young woman bound to a chair, her mouth sealed with duct tape. Next to these pictures were neatly organized yellow folders labeled A through Z. The sheer meticulousness of it all sent chills down my spine. Something in me snapped. Whatever secrets those folders held weren't for me to discover. My first instinct was to pull out my phone and document what I had just seen before getting out of there safely. But just my luck, there was no signal in the basement. It was then that panic set in. This wasn't just weird anymore, it was dangerous. I bolted up the stairs to leave but froze when I realized something horrifying. The door was locked. Terror washed over me as I tried the doorknob again just to confirm. At the same time, the man's gruff voice suddenly came from the other side of the door, apologizing through the barrier. "Sorry about that," he rasped. "Must have locked itself accidentally, just gonna grab the key real quick." For a few seconds I stood frozen in shock and disbelief. Something about his tone made every hair on my neck stand on end. I didn't respond but scanned the door's locking mechanism carefully before retreating downstairs to search for anything that might help. My eyes landed again on that utility desk. There were screwdrivers scattered across its surface. Without much thought, I grabbed 3 of various sizes and bolted back upstairs. Desperately, I tried each one on the lock until one, a smaller screwdriver, finally fit and turned. The lock clicked open. I didn't stop to assess the situation or even spare a thought for anything left behind. I only knew I needed to leave immediately. Sprinting from his house, I jumped into my car and gunned it down the street without ever glancing in my rearview mirror. As soon as I reached a nearby police station, I reported everything. The pictures, his address, where they could find that drawer full of evidence. Days later I was watching an old episode of Wipeout, one of those shows that aired in the early 2000s while babysitting Cody. He was playing on the floor with his toys, which were scattered across the living room. As he played, I noticed he kept referring to someone named Agnes. It was as if he was talking to another child, pretending they were sitting right in front of him. At first, I didn't think much of it. Kids have wild imaginations after all. But then something odd happened. One of Cody's toys, sitting far across the room, suddenly activated by itself. It wasn't just any toy. It was one of those cube-shaped gadgets with a crank that you pull down to make a simulated racing background appear on its tiny screen. It's the kind of toy that requires physical effort to use. It doesn't just spring to life on its own. Yet there it was, running as though someone had just cranked it. Perplexed, I asked Cody how that was possible. He glanced up at me and nonchalantly said, "Agnes is playing with it." That answer sent chills down my spine. Trying to shake off the unease, I walked over, turned the toy off, and did my best to ignore what had just happened. Later that night, as I waited for Cody's parents to return, something even more unsettling occurred. I went to the bathroom to wash up when I heard a knock on the door. Assuming it was Cody, I called out to him as I opened it, but there was no one there. The hallway outside the bathroom was empty. As I glanced down the hall, I noticed one of the doors slowly creaking open, inch by agonizing inch. Startled, I turned off the bathroom light and cautiously walked toward the room, fully expecting to find Cody trying to prank me. But when I entered, there he was, sitting perfectly still on the far corner of the bed. His eyes were fixed on me as though nothing unusual had happened. I asked him calmly, "Cody, who opened that door?" Without missing a beat, he replied, "Agnes." At this point, I was genuinely unnerved. I picked Cody up and carried him back to the living room where we stayed for the rest of the night until his parents came home. When they arrived, I decided not to mention anything about the strange occurrences. It felt too bizarre to explain anyway. A few weeks later, Cody's parents reached out and asked if I could babysit him again. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I never called them back.